So we're going to look at preferences today. So quite often, if you're in an app, you might be able to customize the app. So the example we're going to look at is, I'm just going to trivial one. If you've got something that tracks weight, if you're in the US, you might use pounds to track it. In the UK, you might use kilograms. So we're going to build a little app that allows you to set preference. Now, obviously, you could build your own interface for this, but Android is sort of designed to allow you to create preference screens that can be displayed to the user, and it will actually, depending on the type of preference you have, set all that up for you. Okay, so you can have preferences where you might specify a string that represents a particular word you use for something, or you might decide whether to use, like with the weight example, imperial or metric measurements, so on and so forth. Okay, so here's an example. This is one where you might, let's say, in a food ordering app, if you specify a dietary preference, maybe it would filter the menu so that you could have a menu item that suited what you ate. Okay, so the idea is that with the preferences system on Android, it standardizes how things look for the user. So you get used to setting preferences in a particular way. And I think from what I've seen, although I'm not an Android user, quite often that appears through the use of like a menu button with a little drop down. Yes, that's what we're going to do. And hopefully that's what people are used to. So we'll look at how we can define preferences, how they can be displayed to the user, how we can read them back, because obviously we change the behavior in our application based on the preferences that the user has set. And also the user can change preferences midway through the app, and we might need to listen for those changes and make adjustments kind of on the fly. So we'll do that, and we'll try and build a little app as we go along to do that. We can set up our preferences just by creating an XML file. Okay, we create an XML resource. We call it, I think if we call it preference, by default, it automatically puts the HTML element in of a preference screen XML preference element in, and then we can specify different types of preference. So things that could be checked, so that might be, a list of allergens or something, switch whether you want something turned on or off, lists, edit text if you want the user to be able to put in some kind of free text value. We can group how they're displayed as well, and we can also put them on additional screens. So if you think, I don't really want one really big, massive list of preferences, if you've got a whole group of preferences, you might create a new preference screen inside a preference screen element so that the user taps on that and is then pushed to another screen of preferences. Okay, so we specify layout, but we've also got to specify values for those preferences that we can read. So they'll typically be strings. So I think I'll try and do this bit by bit. Okay, so I've got an application. The application, all it's got in it at the moment, is it still running? Oh great, it's screwed up. Can I get the zoom? Okay, this is all it does. Okay, it says weight as a label, and it tells you that the weight in kilograms, and stop zooming. There we go. And the user can type in a weight. Okay, so something like that. Now ideally, what I want to be able to do is to go onto a menu here, go to settings, and allow them to change that to be pounds. Okay, at the moment it doesn't do anything. It also should save, but it doesn't save at the moment either. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. So before I actually build the functionality for the app, I'm going to look at how we can create a preference screen. So we need an XML file in our resources. So I can right click, new directory, and I can just call it XML. Okay, and if we do new, we can do a new XML resource file, and I think if I call it, I can't remember if it's preference or preferences. I think it's preferences, but I'm going to make sure I match this because it will give me the well, I think I just called it preferences last time. I haven't even put the name of the file, but we'll call it preferences and see what happens. Lowercase, and then click OK. Yeah, so I've called it preferences, and it's figured out, I don't know how it's figured it out, but it's figured out I want a preference screen element. So that represents like a single, if we go back to that earlier slide, what's behind this modal view is a single preference screen. Okay, but obviously we've put like a list option there. So we can then define different types of preferences. So we've got things that can be like a checkbox, so things that they can turn on and off. We've got, as I said, edit text, multiple selections, categories, so we can put preferences in categories, additional screens. I've never tried what a ringtone preference is and quite where you need that in an app, I don't know, but I'm going to use a switch preference. Okay, so I'm going to put in a switch preference. We need to give it a key. So the key is how we can access it programmatically later when we're looking for a preference. Okay, so I'm going to call this use imperial. Okay, probably should be something like imperial units or something like that. We give it a title, so when it's displayed to the user, it's obvious what it is. Okay, so we can say title, I'm going to say use imperial measurements. And we can also provide a summary, which is a bit more detail. So we might say use pounds instead of kilograms. And then we should give it a default value. So when we build an application, what's it going to start off as? Okay, so obviously choices of default values for something that's a switch are true or false. So we'll set that to false. Okay, and then we can close off the element. So if we had more preferences, we'd just like keep adding them there. We might put them in like a category. So we might give a category a name, and then inside the category, it's probably going to complain I haven't got a name. Then we could add, you know, more switch preferences or checkbox preferences or so on and so forth. So we just basically build them up in there, and one of the tasks we'll do today will be building like a screen of preferences. But rather than get bogged down in that, I'm just going to put one in for now. So yeah, as I say, we've got additional screens. So if we wanted additional screen, we just put in a preference screen, wherever it is, and then put more preferences inside that. So we can just nest them, and it will launch another screen from that one. Okay, we've done a preference entry. So what I probably should have done here is this says that title summary should be string resources. So it's probably, why is it not complaining at me? Normally complains and says like use string resource. Oh, there we go, extract string resource. Use imperial. And then we maybe make that a string resource as well. Imperial description. Okay, so there's string resources. And we set a default value because it's appropriate. Okay, so to display preferences is a bit of extra work because we need to use a backwards compatible package. So we have to add a dependency to the module build.gradle file, which we have to get right. Obviously, the version here depends on the version we're building for. So if we're building for API 28, in that case, it'll be 28, which we are. So this is currently correct. But if you do it later in the year or there's another update, it might change. Okay, so let's go and do that. So obviously, we open up our Gradle scripts menu, open the module level one, and we can add the implementation here. This is just a magic string. Well, it's a string, so we forget it right. Support -v7 : I'm going to have to check this. Preferences. Preference -v. Oh, I've got the v7 in the wrong place, and the colon is there, so it's preference -v7 : and if we can check which version it is because we can look at an existing package in here and just match it. So 28.0.0. Okay. So if we sync this, if it doesn't work, we've probably made a typo. So for example, you can see how you've got some of you've got dots between them and then you've got colons. So it's quite easy to screw that up. I did last night when I was running through this. Okay, but that's built successfully, so we've got it right. Okay. So then what we actually end up doing is creating a fragment, but we don't have to put all the bits in the fragment ourselves in the XML. Okay, so we create a fragment that doesn't have any XML for it. So the easiest way to do that is literally just to create a new Kotlin file, and you know, class fragment : preference fragment compat. So let's do that. So go back up here, new Kotlin file class, we'll make it a class. Preference, what have I called it? I'll make sure it matches what I've done here. I call it settings fragment, so let's do that, settings fragment. And we extend the preference fragment compat. Okay, and this has got a constructor, it doesn't take any parameters, and because it does, and we're working in Kotlin, we've got to call the constructor there. Okay, why is it moaning at me? Okay, so it's basically saying that it's an abstract class and we need to implement particular members, so we can use a shortcut or use a little thingy and choose to implement members, and it will force us to implement on create preferences. Okay, it's really helpful. One, it gives us to do, which we can get rid of because we're going to do the to do now. But it doesn't really give us good parameter names. I don't know why I keep coming across certain bits of Android where we're working in Kotlin where it doesn't, give us a helpful name for what the parameters are. I mean, we can see the type. Okay, so this should represent a saved instance state. Even if we don't use them, I think it's good to name them if we ever come back to it. And this is a key, or a root key for the preferences. Okay, so to set that up, we basically say, well, we've already defined the preferences in XML, so we just basically tell the fragment that we're going to set its preferences from a resource, okay, and we need to say which resource it is, so we can do like r.xml, which is where I put it, and I called it preferences, and we also have to pass in that key, so we need this root key from here. Okay, so that will create a fragment with the contents of the whatever we put in our XML preferences. Okay, so that's kind of easy. That does it for us, and it lays it all out nice and friendly. So we don't really have to worry about doing that. Okay, that should be there. Okay, what else do we need to do? We've done that bit. We also need to create an activity. Now, you can either use the like right-click, new activity. It's probably the best way to do it. Why is it coming up? And then just do like an empty activity, okay? And then not generate a layout file, and then give it a name. I'm not going to do it like that. I'm just going to do it manually, just to sort of remind you of something that you may have forgotten. Because again, I did this last night. I did it manually, and I was like, why is it not working? So I'm going to create a settings activity. I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to make it a subclass of app compat activity. So I'll call it settings activity. Again, we don't need any XML for it. I'm going to make it implement app compat activity. Okay, so that's not too far off what we do. It's also got a constructor, so we need to construct it there. Okay, we don't need to put too much in this one either. Basically, we need to tell the activity that actually what it's going to do is show a fragment. Okay, so we can do that by overriding on create. We make sure they're at the right create because there's two versions of it, and it's this one we want. Okay, the one that just has a bundle, not the saved instance state, because this is the one that's called when it's instantiated, not from file. If we did it from file, we'd probably saved other things. And then we just ask, so the an app compat activity has a support fragment manager as part of it, so we can just type support fragment manager. What's going on there? Support, come back, support fragment manager, there we go. And then we tell it to begin a transaction, and that transaction is to replace, and we basically replace the content with the settings fragment. Okay, so we can do android.r.id.content, and then we pass in a new instance of the settings fragment. Okay. Once we've done that, we then call commit. Okay, so what that's basically doing is saying this activity is going to have this fragment inside it. That's pretty much it. Okay, so that's our activity completed and our fragment completed. So we need to do it, but there's not too much to it. It's just kind of boilerplate code that we put in place. Okay, so we're getting there slowly. The problem we would have as it stands is that because this activity is not declared in the Android manifest, because we made it manually rather than using the new activity option, as soon as we try and launch it, it's going to crash and say it doesn't exist in the manifest. And that's why I did it manually, just to kind of point it out. It even tells us there, I didn't spot this last night, but if you hover over it, it says it's not registered in the manifest. Okay, that's pretty straightforward to do. We just open up the manifest. We can copy one from the main activity, except we don't need any of these intent filters. So we can just say something like activity name equals dot, what have I called it? Settings activity. There we go. Pops it in for us. There we go. We could probably make it self-closing. I don't know, but I'll leave it like that for now. Does it say I can self-close it? No. But anyway, it would now be okay. So we have to do that because we've done it manually. Okay. We're getting there, but there's still pretty much no logic in our application to do anything, and there's no way of changing the settings. Okay, so we want to start working out how we can get to the preference screen. So we'll get that working, and then we'll go back and write the logic in our activity and see how we can read those preferences. So I need a menu. I haven't currently got a menu, so I'm going to add a menu folder. So if I do new directory and call it menu, and then if I right click in here, it will give me a menu resource file because it's clever like that. I'll call it menu again. And then we need to put an item that allows us to set our preferences. Okay, so we can either do it with design, and we can like drag on a menu item. Boom, we'll do partly like that because I'm lazy. We need to give it a title. So I called it preferences, so let's do that. Preferences. We need to give it an ID, and we'll call that preferences as well. Why not? And we can specify like the order it appears in the category. We haven't got anything else in the menu, so it doesn't really matter what we put for that. And then we can decide whether it shows as an action. So we don't really want just a, I think it'd be better in that little drop down because that's where what I've seen. Anyone on Android, it comes in the drop down, I think. So we'll go as never, and then it'll always be in like a submenu. It won't just appear as its own like item on the bar on its own. Okay, so that should give us, once we inflate it, a menu in our main activity. Now, obviously, just putting the menu there won't do that. We've got to like implement the code that sets up the menu. Okay. So, anyone happen to remember how to do that? No. Yes, we do need a layout inflator. Okay, and there's a method we override. So you've got the right idea. Anyone, do you know the name of the method, or a guess? Sorry. So we do need. So we write code that's called menu. It's close. It's on create options menu, which I can't see, which is helpful. On create options menu. Okay. And then we basically inflate the menu. So we can say menu inflator, which already belongs to the activity, inflate, and we need to give it a resource ID. So r dot, and it's in the menu folder, and I call it menu. I think that's it for that. And then, yeah, that should do. So that should inflate the menu. So now at least if I run the application, I should have a menu. We won't be able to do anything with the menu because we haven't overridden the, oh no, we have got an error. No value passed for P1. What am I missing? Menu inflator dot inflate. Oh, I've got to pass in the menu itself, which is from here. There we go. Let's try again. So all being well. There we go, got menu. You can click preferences, but nothing will happen. Okay, so we need to add some logic for preferences when they click it. So we can do on options item selected. Okay, and then what we need to do there is we need to create an intent for the settings activity. Okay, now it's the only thing on the menu, but if we were to come back later and add another item to the menu and we hadn't bothered checking what item it was, everything would go to the settings activity. So it is probably prudent to check if the item ID matches the one we specified, which is r dot menu dot. What did we give it as an ID? Or did I give it? Oh, preferences. No, yes, preferences. So r.id.preferences. There we go. So if it matches, then we create an intent. So var intent equals intent. Why is it messing up with me? Intent. And what do we need for our intent? Context, this, and the class that we need. So that's settings activity, not the fragment, class.java. Okay, and then obviously we need to start the activity. So we can say start activity intent. Okay, so now what should happen? We should actually see our preference screen. So let's restart our app. Okay, and you can see here we go, we've got our title, use imperial measurements, and use pounds instead of kilograms, and we've got a switch that we can toggle. Okay, so that's all taken care of for us. That's the nice thing about preferences, it's nice and easy to set up. Okay, alas, there's a bit more work we need to do in order to be able to read these and listen for changes and so on and so forth. So we need to start thinking about how we can do that. So I think firstly, we need to be able to read that value. Well, actually, no. Let's start by detecting a change and changing the value in our label, because that's probably the most important thing, and then it's mostly tidying up after that. So, in order to be able to detect a change, we have to create a on-shared preference change listener. Okay, so we can do that somewhere in our main activity. I'll call it something like, what have I called it here? Pref change listener? Yeah. Pref change listener. Okay. So shared preferences on shared preference change listener is an interface. So we have to create our own implementation of that interface. So we can do something like shared preferences dot on shared preference change listener. If we do that, oh, come on. Will it give me the... I won't put it in automatically for me. I wanted to. Let's have a look at the. Let's just quickly have a look at the interface. Okay, so here's the interface, and it implements a method called onSharedPreferenceChange. Okay, it is the only method in the interface. So instead of doing that really long code that we could do, you know, if we do onClick, you can do it all like manually and create an object that implements it, and then implement this method. We can that can be abstracted away, and we can simply have like a Lambda function that has the preferences and the key passed into it. Okay, so if I go back and choose this option, we can see we get the preferences and the key passed in, and then we write our logic here. So here we're actually implementing, if I go back, go to declaration, we are implementing on shared preference changed. Okay, so we just need to remember that. So basically what's happened is the shared preference has changed, we're being passed an instance of the shared preferences, and we're being passed a key of the preference that was changed. So we know what change has taken place. So if they flick that switch, we'll get the key that corresponds to that switch, which if we go to our, close our menu, if we go to our preferences XML, it should be use imperial. Okay. So let's do that. So we're doing this. We need to implement the code for what we want to change. Well, firstly, we would probably want to check that they have chosen that key. So we can say something like if key is equal to use, oh, it's a string, isn't it? Use underscore imperial. Kind of starting to wonder whether maybe I should have made it a string resource rather than like having magic strings all over the place, but never mind. Okay. So at this point, we know they've changed imperial, but we don't know what imperial is. Okay, we have to somehow find out you know, what the value is. It's a switch, so it's going to be true or false, but we need to find out how we get it. So we can use this shared preferences object, okay, and that will allow us to get different things that correspond to whatever keys they are. So I happen to know, obviously, because I created it, that use imperial is a Boolean. There's infinite space for error here because there's nothing to stop me calling get int with the key for a Boolean, but never mind, that's Android for you, okay. And we need to provide the key, okay, which is going to be key, or I could use imperial, we know it's the same, but that's shorter. And we can also specify default value, and we have to. So quite why there's not an option without it, when I know for a fact, because it's changed, that there's no point having default value, but I have to specify one here. Okay, it makes sense if we're reading it for the first time, but if it has changed, then it's not going to be, we don't need a default value, okay, because there is going to be a value for it. And then we need to do something with it, okay. So essentially what we're doing, if we put the data in, and it was in kilograms, we need to convert it to imperial, and if it was in imperial, we need to convert it, i.e. pounds, we need to convert it back again. Okay, so we probably want a couple of functions to do the conversion because we might need them in other places. So I'm very quickly going to write a couple of functions to convert pounds to, well, let's say pounds from kilograms. So I'm going to work with integers. It does, just for the purposes of getting it working, because of the display, it will be all funny. So we're going to convert pounds to from kilograms. It needs to return an integer. And then if I hadn't printed out my code that I wrote yesterday, I would go on Google and I would Google for the conversion ratio. But because I've got my notes here, I can write that here. So basically, we want to return the result of converting that, okay? Because the conversion ratio is like a double, and I want to be reasonably accurate, I'm going to convert my kilograms to a double, which is nice and easy to do in Kotlin, just do to double. Then I can multiply it by the conversion factor, which happens to be 2.20462. Obviously, I want to send it back as an integer, so I can convert it back to an integer. Okay. And then we want a similar one, fun, kgs from pounds, pounds, int, returns, int, return, pounds dot to double, times, we could do 1 over 2.24, or we could just use 0.453592, and then convert that back to an integer. Okay. So we've got these sort of helper functions there, okay? So we can go back to here. Well, if they've changed it, we need to do the conversion in the right way. So basically, what comes back from this get preferences Boolean is going to be some kind of Boolean value. So, and it's going to represent whether or not they're working in imperial. So we can say something like val imperial equals that, okay? So if we were working in imperial, either switch to imperial, we need to take the value that they've got in that edit text, we need to convert it to an integer, we need to call the pounds from kilograms method and then put it back in. So we can start off by, I've called that, by the way, if we go to our, just so you know what's going on, if we go to our activity main, okay, this, where has it gone? It's really, really, really small. So this is called edit text weight, but also it's changed the label. So that's called TV for text view unit. Okay, so let's do the unit first because that's easy, and then we can just check it's actually working before we do the hard stuff. So back to main activity. So I think I've actually forgotten to do that in my example code, which is a bit stupid. But either way, if it's imperial, we need to set the unit, okay, text to pounds, else tvunit.text is equal to kilograms. Okay, and it's going to complain that I haven't got string resources, so I'm going to, come on, let me convert it to a string resource. Extract, there we go, missing it. Okay, and I happen to have one for kilograms because I've already used it in the layout. So r dot, was it string dot kilograms? There we go. Okay, so that should mean, before we do any numeric testing, that if the user changes it, it will go from saying kilograms to pounds, assuming I've got that right. Okay. The one thing I haven't yet done, and which is quite important, is I have to attach this, or I have to sort of register this change listener. Okay. If I don't register that change listener, it won't get kind of notified. So I have to get an instance of the preference manager, okay, and tell the preference manager that I want to register this listener. Okay, so we can create a preference manager in something like onCreate. So we can start off by, oh, what's going on here? Did I delete a bracket? Yeah, I did. So we can do something like var pref manager, and we can just do preference manager. Where's it gone? Preference manager. Did I get the right one? I have, thank you. There's also, I've made another mistake here. Let me just take that out again. So, in order to be backwards compatible, we've used, we've got two versions of the preference manager. And you can just about see here, we've got preference and v7 preference. Okay, we want to make sure we use the right one. We're using the support library, so we want the support preference manager. What I did first time was click that one, which would give me the wrong one, which wouldn't help. Okay, so once we've got our preference manager, we can ask for the default shared preferences. We have to pass a context. Obviously, activity extends context, so we can pass this. Okay. The only slight problem here is I want reference to preference manager elsewhere, okay, but it won't like it because I tried it earlier if I simply try and do this. Okay, I think when you run, sorry, it comes up with an error. It better come up with an error because it did earlier. Come on. Maybe it came up with an error when I tried to access it. No, it's just not running. How odd. Let's try again. Yeah, here we go. So we're getting an exception thrown, okay, and basically the context doesn't exist until it's been created. So when we're passing null, it doesn't like it. So anyone remember the solution when we need to instantiate something, but we can't like put it in a constructor because it's an activity? Late init, yeah. So we can say late init var pref manager. We can say it's a preference manager. And then we'll just, no, just cut that, preference manager. And then in onCreate, we can say pref manager equals that. Why is it complaining? Type mismatch. Oh, yeah, of course. It isn't because I'm calling get shared preferences, so what it returns is not preference manager, it's actually a set of shared preferences. There we go. So that was silly. Okay, so now we've got our shared preferences. I can try and remember what I was in the middle of doing before I got to that point, which was, oh yeah, registering the listener. Okay, so I could have kept it there for now, but we'll need it elsewhere later. So then we can say something like preference manager was actually shared preferences. So I'm actually going to refactor that because I think it's a bad choice of name. Refactor, rename, shared prefs will do, shared prefs. Okay, and then we can say shared prefs dot register on shared preference change listener, and we can pass in just a listener. So we have, where have we created it? It's down here, and we call it pref change listener. Pref change listener. Okay, so now what should happen is our activity loads, we get an instance of shared preferences, we register the listener that we created here with that. So when a change occurs in shared preferences, this implementation of the shared preferences on shared preference change listener will be called, or the function on shared preferences change that's inside it will be called. Hopefully we've got this key that matches the one that's in our preferences. We'll check if it's been set to imperial. If it has, at this stage, only the units that are displayed should change, but we can verify that by running the application. So hopefully we'll restart it. Hopefully this time it won't crash. I can go in here and go to preferences. I can change it to, I'd left it on imperial and from last time, and I haven't done anything to set it to kilograms, set it to pounds if it's already set at imperial. So that's another problem we've got to solve. But I'll put it back, so it's still at kilograms. If we actually make a change now, we should see it go to pounds. There we go. Yep, everyone see that switch? And all being well, I should now be able to put it back to kilograms. There is a problem though, if I run it afresh, even if it's the preference is set to imperial, it will be set at kilograms. So we've also got to fix that. Okay. So I'm actually going to need to call this, I need to do this again as well, because I need to actually check here if the preference is right for when it loads. Okay. So I think we've pretty much got the code to figure out whether it's imperial. So let's borrow that. The only difference here is that instead of using shared preferences from that's passed into the lambda function, I need the one here from which is shared prefs. And I need to name the key exactly. What's gone wrong there? Shared prefs. And the key is, as I say, this use imperial. So let's pop that in there. And then if it is imperial, I need to do exactly what I did here before. I think we can probably refactor that out into a method called like set units. So let's refactor extract function set units. Okay, so now we've got a function here. Does anyone actually think of a way we can improve this? If we work in Java, we could do something that saves having to write tvunit.txt twice. Anyone think how you might do it? We can't actually do it in Kotlin, but there's a kind of equivalent. Sorry? A switch, not quite a switch, but you're thinking the right kind of idea. There's a special kind of statement. A when? No, so a when would be a switch in Kotlin. So if we're in Java, we can actually write something like this: tvunit.txt equals, and then you can actually do, what I'm doing is a ternary statement. So then we'd say imperial question mark, and then if it's imperial, we'd get pounds like that, and then we do a colon, okay, and you'd do that, okay. So it's like a one-line if statement, or technically it's called a ternary statement. Okay, we can't actually do that in Kotlin, but there's a very, very close equivalent, which is basically a one-line if statement. So we actually say if imperial, so we're saying tvunit.txt equals, and then if it's imperial, it's getString, and then we change it to an else. Okay, so that does essentially exactly the same as this, but it saves us 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code. Okay. You see it a fair bit, you know, programmers, you try and write things that shorter. It saves you having to write tvunit.txt twice. So it's an optimization. So it's probably worth trying to get used to reading these. So I'm going to leave it like with the new version. Okay. So if you're interested in it, it's called a ternary statement. Well, it's called a ternary statement in Java. I don't know whether the same name applies in Kotlin because it's slightly different because it doesn't use that question mark and colon. syntax. Okay, so we can then call set units from here, and similarly, when it loads, we can say set units and pass in our imperial value there. Okay, so now it should the unit should be correct when we load. Okay, and we've seen how to access it. What we really need to do as well is to start getting the weight values correct. So the way I originally designed it was I was storing the weight value in whichever unit the user was using, and then I decided that that was a bit messy. So I think what we'll do is we'll store the value in kilograms and do the conversion as and when we need. It's not brilliant because you end up with rounding issues. So if you convert enough times from kilograms to pounds, the actual value you start off with changes, because you might find that conversion from kilograms to pounds in whole numbers, you know, you might go from like, I don't know, 100 kilograms to 212 pounds, and then when you convert 212 pounds back into kilograms as an integer, you might end up with like 99 or 101. So it can be a bit not terribly accurate. But so how do we fix those values? Well, as I said, in the change listener, we need to go ahead and read the value from the edit text. So we can say something like var weight value equals, it's called edit text weight. Okay, I want its text. I want to convert it to a string, but I also want to convert that string to an integer. Okay, but problem is, if the string is empty and I try to convert it to an integer using toInt, it can actually be null. Okay, so you'll notice there's a toInt and there's a toInt or null. The problem with using toInt is that it actually could be null, but it's not actually like an optional variable when you bring it back. So it's a bit dangerous. So the safer option is to use toInt or null. And if it's blank, we can assume that they haven't entered a value. So actually, rather than making this what it currently is either a nullable integer, is if it is null, we want to specify a value for it. Does anyone remember how we can do that really simply? Rather than writing, if this is null, then do this, otherwise do that. Can anyone remember how we can, there's a special operator. Yeah, excellent. So we can put the Elvis operator in. Okay, so if I can get Elvis's hairstyle the right way around. No, it's the other way around. There we go. And we can set it to 0 if it's null. So now weight value, rather than being a nullable int, is an int, because if the result of reading the text, convert it to a string and then into a null is null, it'll become 0. Okay, which is fine. So then we can say something like if imperial, then we want the edit text to be the result of, well actually we'll set weight value. It's because we're changing it. So we can say if imperial weight value is equal to pounds from kilograms, and we can pass in the initial value, which would have been in pounds, because remember they're doing a change. So they flicked the button to change it. So if they set it to imperial, it was kilograms, so we convert it to pounds. Otherwise, we can say weight value equals kilograms from pounds, because they've gone the other way, which is weight value. And then we basically can go ahead and set that weight to be, set the text of the weight to be the weight value. It's an integer, so we can convert it to a string with template, which is weight value. Okay. Anyone spot an optimization? I think we should be able to do something with this. Yeah, exactly. So we can say something like weight value equals if imperial, that needs to go in brackets, then it's this, else it's that. Okay, so now if I put a value in and switch it, we should see it change. So let's try that. So 95 kilos, hopefully I left it on kilos. Yep, go to pounds, go back, and there we go. We've got our conversion. Okay, similarly if I go back the other way, I should think it'll probably go to like 94 now. Yeah, but you get the gist. Okay. If we were, properly doing things right, like storing the variable as a decimal and what have you, would probably be, we wouldn't have that rounding error, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. What else is important to do? Well, it would be kind of a good idea, because if I quit my application, I lose my weight entirely. It hasn't stored it, okay? So we kind of would be useful to save the weight, okay? And we can actually use preferences to do that as well, believe it or not, okay? But we don't want to use the same preferences, because we don't want to have to create like an item in a preferences.xml file in order just to be able to do that, okay? So we can have preferences that are like attached to or belong to, like, for example, just an activity, or you can do them by name, okay? I don't think I put this on the slides. I'll just check I have done everything that we've done here as well. We've done that. We've looked at, we've done like getting a preference manager. It's possible to edit. We'll be using the editor for our own preference, but not for the shared one. The editor, you probably don't want to be using the editor, because that kind of means that you're not putting the preferences in the preferences screen. And kind of the whole point of having the user preferences is that they can go and set them in a preferences screen. We've also listened for preference changes. Okay. The other thing I should mention, which I didn't mention, is when we created that that shared preference manager, okay, we created it as a property here of the class, okay? Now you might have thought, well, actually, instead of doing that, I'll just create an anonymous object here, okay? So we just create it in line, like we could do with a click listener. There is a problem with that, and it's buried in the documentation for the on-shared preference change listener, and that is that if we don't hold our own reference to it, like if it doesn't belong, say, to our main activity or something else that we own, so if we just register it and not have it as a property here, we can make it private. That's fine. It isn't retained by the preferences system, so it actually just gets picked up by the garbage collector and it doesn't work. Okay, so I have put that in the tutorial for today. There's a little note and a link to where it's kind of buried in the documentation. But you'd normally think, well, actually, it seems a bit over the top to keep a reference to it here. Why don't I just declare it in line? If you do that, it won't work. Okay, so if you'd just done, like, if you just put all of that, if you'd done like object : shared preference on shared preference change listener and written that code in here, it wouldn't work. It'd just be lost as soon as, or very shortly after you call register. So it's important to do that. Register listener with preference manager. Handling changes, yeah, we've done that. We've done that as well. Why do we need to access preference directly? Oh, yeah, so if you need to find the exact preference, so you, for example, for some reason need the, rather than doing get boolean, which is what we've done, where is it? Rather than using like get boolean, if you need to know something more about the preference, like the switch preference itself, you can do it this way. I'm not going to demonstrate that, but you can do it that way. I don't quite know why you'd want to again, but it's possible. Okay, right, things that are not on the slide. So it'd be good to save the weight. Now we could like create a file and then write the text that refers to the weight in a file, but that seems like really a lot of overkill for storing like one integer value. Okay, so we can have our own set of preferences. So I'm going to create a couple of methods to save and load the weight. Okay, so you can say like private fun save weight and private fun load weight. Okay, so what should happen here? Well, we can get a different set of preferences. Okay, so we can say something like val private preferences. Let's put private preferences, and we can call get preferences. Okay, on activity, and we have to pass in a mode. Okay, there are different modes. I don't know what they will do, but I know that you're meant to use mode private for this. Okay, some of them I think you can't use anymore. Okay, so this gets preferences specific to the activity. Okay, if you want like preferences that are specific to something else, you can do them by name as well. Okay, you can read up on how you do it by name. I'm not going to tell you because I can't remember. Preferences. Okay, so that gets us a different set of preferences. Okay, now in this case we do want to write to them. Okay, and we don't want the user to see them. So we can say something like, with private preferences. Oh, why does it keep doing that? Private preferences dot edit. Okay, and then this will keep it open for the point we write it, and then when we're finished, we like apply the changes by calling apply, and that's why the warning was there. We didn't call apply. Okay, so what we then do there is get the weight. Okay, so we can say something like val weight equals edit text weight dot text dot text dot to string dot to int or null, else operator the right way round. That gives us the weight. Then we need to check if we're working in imperial. Okay, we've got to be careful here because we want the other set of preferences. Okay, so we get that from our pref manager by what have I called it? Shared prefs, not a manager, is it? It's our shared preferences. So we can go to shared preferences, and we can ask shared preferences for the Boolean for our key, which was use imperial. Okay, and then we can specify a default value for that. False. Okay, so this does make sense because if they never changed it, there won't be a value, and we'd want it to be false because they start off as kilograms. If we'd started off as imperial, so if we design the app, so if they launch it for the first time, it's in imperial, and that's the on option, then obviously we'd set the default value to true at this point. So then we can say something like val, the kilogram weight is either going to be, and we can use one of these statements again, we can say if imperial, if it is imperial, then it's kilograms from pounds, and we pass in the weight, which we've read in. Otherwise, it's just weight, which we've already got because it's already in kilograms. Okay, and then to save that, we call a method called putInt. Okay, and putInt belongs to, you're thinking, how are we doing putInt? It's because we're in this private preferences thing. So putInt is a method of private preferences, and this with syntax allows us to, rather than having to write private preferences dot putInt, because we're using with dot edit, we can just call putInt. We need to give it a name. We can do weight, and then we pass in that value, which is going to be kilogram weight. So that will save our preferences. Loading is kind of similar. We still need our private preferences, so we can copy that. Okay, we might keep private preferences like we've kept our shared preferences. Okay, as a member of the class, but we don't have to. Again, we need to find out whether we're working imperial, and again, so we can just copy that code again from here, rather than writing it all again. Okay, and then we can get the weight out of the preferences. So we can say val kilogram weight, which is we stored it as a kilogram. W-E-I-G-H-T. Okay, that is going to simply be from our private preferences. We call getInt. We're passing that exact same key, which was where is it? Weight. There we go. Okay, and we can supply a default value for that. Okay, so that will give us a value that's definitely an int. And then basically, if it's imperial, we basically, I'm doing it the long way now, but edit text, weight dot, what am I doing? Set text, and then we can say pounds from kilograms, pass in the kilogram weight, else. So we could convert this to a one-line statement, but set text, and then that's just kg weight. Okay, so we've now got a mechanism to save and load things. Okay, the problem is, when do we call them, and what point? Well, makes sense. We've got a couple of options. We could implement an on-text change listener for the text. That's one way of doing it. That probably gives us more saves than we need. One other option might be to save it on stop. So if we override the on stop method of our activity, let's try and keep them kind of banded together. We could say on stop, we will call save weight, and we might as well load the weight when we create. Okay, so we can call load weight from there, and I think I did it on resume as well, because I think I tried something else and it didn't work. I can't quite remember why I had to put it in resume. And I also found out that I had to, on resume, I also had to set the units as well. So let's leave it out for now and just try it and see if it works. If we have a problem, then we'll come back and put that in, because it might be that I didn't actually need to do it and was just being overzealous. So all being well now, we should have an application that persists the weight and persists the display of that weight when we run it. So let's hit run. So it won't have saved it from last. Oh, great. Let's have a look. So we've got an exception. We've got an exception in load weight. And what is the exception? String resource not found. Oh, of course. Why am I calling? Ah, yes. Anyone? Okay. Does anyone like to figure out what has gone wrong? If we look at the exception, okay, it's occurred at this line here. Okay, was it 114? Yeah, 114. And it's saying it's not found a string resource. Okay, but I can pass a string to set text and it should display it. But obviously something has gone wrong. Anyone like to tell me? They can see what's happened.
Do you need that R dot to actually get the ID of it?
You're on the right lines.
Do you need to put it in the string and do the?
Yes. So we either need to pass a resource by ID, but obviously this isn't a resource because we've calculated it. But that would be a solution if we were trying to put a regular string in, have it as a string resource. So this is an integer. A string resource under the hood is an integer because Android is evil. So it's trying to use this integer to look up a string resource. Okay. I don't know why they didn't have set text from resource as a different method, because basically they're relying on the different type of overload. So if we were to look at the set text, we've got set text with an int, but we've also got the exact same set text probably below that's the string resource. Where's set text with the string? Well, if I just start typing it, if we do this again, set text. Come on. Yeah, you can see we can take a character sequence, come back up, or a character array with a start and end for the length, or a resource ID. So it doesn't give us any, doesn't tell me that I've got it wrong, whereas what I really need to do is to put this in as a string and use like a template to fix it. Okay. What? Oh, I put it in the wrong place. It won't be okay, but I put the what is returned from this is still an integer. So I put my quotes in the wrong place. I need to put my quote in here, my $sign there, and my second quote there. And Okay, it doesn't like this because it thinks this is the object, so I have to put it in braces because it's a method call. So then it will evaluate everything inside the braces. So that will be okay. Now here, I don't need to call a method, so I can literally just do kg weight. Okay, so all being well now, when I run it, it won't crash, and it should work. I hope. Okay, so there we go. We didn't save it last time, so let's put in a value. I'll just check with kilograms first. So we've set it to 67 kilograms, and then what I'll do is I'll terminate the app. So hopefully on stop would have been called. Okay, and then I'll relaunch it, wherever it is, press lecture. Boom. Okay, so far so good. Let's change it to imperial. Okay, so we convert it to imperial. Let's terminate our app. Let's run it again and hope I don't have further more debugging to do. Was that what it was before? I can't remember what I set it to. Well, let's set it to like 300. It might be close. Bear in mind, in the background, it's converting it to kilograms and back again. So as long as we get a value close enough to 300, I'm happy for the purposes of this. 147. Okay, well, I've set it to 300. I'll terminate it, and as long as it's close enough to 300, as long as it's not out by more than 2, I'll be happy.
This would be a great weight loss app.
Yeah. Okay, so there it is. So it's working. Okay, there is a flaw with how the calculations are done and handled because we're not storing things in decimals and conversions are screwing things up a bit. But you get the gist. Okay. Any questions?